Hello and welcome to In Discussion. In this first series, I talk to leaders in my network about creativity and innovation in the workplace. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi Stuart, welcome to my short series on creativity and innovation in organisations.
Sure, yeah, with pleasure. So my name is Stuart Russell. I am currently head of marketing at a small startup called Telio, which you can see over my shoulder there. I'm based in the UK. I grew up in Scotland, as you can probably tell from my accent, but I now live in yes, I did. I know. Breaking news. And I now live in Cambridge, and of course, it's probably most famous for its university, which has seen a great many creative innovations over the years, from the law of gravity all the way through to Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time. So it's certainly quite an interesting place to live. Telio, my company, we have a couple of European offices, and we have basically created a cloud-based portal for live video production. So we work with a whole number of customers. They can be production companies, they can be broadcasters, sports federations, teams, venues, and we basically have this platform that enables them to produce and edit and distribute live content, and it's all based in the cloud, so you don't need any hardware.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. So, in order to move this conversation forward, I'm going to pose a few questions. Hopefully, they will provoke some interesting conversation. Okay, so let's get going with the first question. We often hear that great leaders are born, not bred. Another way of looking at this is creativity something that you can train and develop, or are you born with it, or without it?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I've thought about this a lot since we first spoke. And I think the short answer is that it's probably a blend, but I would place more emphasis on the nurture side of things. I think we all know people, and I can think of one engineer specifically who I used to work with about 10, 12 years ago. You know, we all know one person, at least one person, who just has this ability to look at problems from a completely different angle. It's like they're looking at it through a different prism, or they're sort of attacking it from a different plane almost. And they just have this ability to come up with solutions because of the angle that they attack the problem from. So those people are out there. They walk among us. And I think for the rest of us, it's probably more to do with nurture, really. And in a professional environment, I think employers can certainly create environments where creativity is encouraged. And I think if you are fortunate enough in the formative stages of your career, if you're fortunate enough to work for companies that do encourage that, they encourage a little bit of risk taking, and they encourage people to kind of think creatively, and people are empowered to put resources into problem solving, then I think that sort of stays with you. It stays with you through the rest of your career. And there have been a couple of occasions in my career when I've been in environments where there has been that sense of, you know, the best idea around the table wins. Doesn't matter where it comes from, and there are, you know, you have the freedom to express yourself. You have the freedom to be creative and innovative. And if you fail, there's a tolerance to that, up to a certain point, of course. But if you fail quickly. You learn the lessons from that and you move on.
Interesting. So apart from the reputation, what were the individual traits or characteristics of this person? I mean, what was it about them that made you think this person is really creative?
It was just the way that he seemed to sort of attack things, you know, the way that he seemed to attack problems. I sometimes, I mean, he was an incredibly intelligent guy anyway, but I think sometimes when you're in the presence of people like that, you sort of feel like you and all of your peers and contemporaries, you're kind of hitting the problem that way, you know, you're sort of coming at it head on. And for whatever reason, this guy who I'm thinking of just had this ability to sort of like come at it from a different angle. You know, we'd all sort of charging through the front door, whereas he's sort of, you know, sneaking down the chimney. And it just had this knack of being able to sort of take the problems apart break them down into smaller elements, but come at them from an angle that maybe us mere mortals might not have considered. Just quickly on that as well. I mean, I think the other point as far as nurture is concerned is that there's no reason why employers can't organize themselves in a way that encourages people to be more creative. I mean, an old boss of mine many years ago once said that business, in any sort of environment, B2C or B2B, business is very, very dynamic. Things are always changing. It's a constantly changing equation. My mother was a chef, and the answer to some of the business problems that you face, it's not just about finding the right ingredients and putting them together in the right proportions, and then you make the recipe, and then that's the magic recipe, and then you just keep on repeating it in bigger and bigger quantities, because the landscape around you is always shifting. What the competition are doing is always changing. The environment, the industry is always changing. So you are constantly tinkering, and that's just a fact of life, I think, in most people's professional career. You never hit on the winning formula. You're always sort of tinkering around with things in order to try and change some of the variables, because success is a constantly shifting thing.
Okay, this makes me think, what do you think about diversity in all its forms? What do you think it can bring to creativity and innovation?
I think it's incredibly important, and I say that as somebody who has spent 13 years now working in the broadcast and production industry, and this industry is not the poster child for diversity at all. It really it's changing. It is changing, but it has not been a particularly great role model for diversity. And I think that in many ways is one of the reasons why, I talked about digital marketing earlier on. It's one of the reasons why it's not featured as heavily in this industry as it has in others, because the norm for people has been going to trade shows, pressing the flesh, having face-to-face conversations, because that's what that age group and that demographic are most comfortable with, which is astonishing in many ways. But I think diversity has an invaluable role. We are seeing the industry changing. I was involved in a panel discussion not so long ago with a group of budding young content creators who are all under 30. And their approach, their attitude to their job and how they go about it is completely different now. It's completely different to the way it was, even 10 years ago, because of the availability of free or low-cost software solutions, because of the availability of YouTube tutorials and people being able to kind of learn how to do stuff online from YouTube and other sources. So I think there's a big change happening. I think it's very important. I think we need more of that, because people bring different skills and different attitudes to the table. People from different cultural backgrounds bring different different senses of logic, different ways of attacking problems because of their cultural background. And you have to be slightly careful, I suppose, in how you manage these things, because I think, we've all been in meetings where it feels sometimes like it's a bit death by committee. It's like you've got 50 people around a table and you're kind of paralyzed by analysis and not able to make decisions. It has to be the right people. But I think different perspectives are always very, very healthy. And I think the more that the industries can do to encourage people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities to...
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Diversity brings different perspectives, different viewpoints and different norms. In this context, we are really talking about diversity in its widest sense, beyond sex and race, but length of experience, job functionality and much, much more.
Just to quickly follow that point up, I mean, we deal with customers all over the world. You're in Canada, CBC are one of our customers. The way that they go about things is different to the way that the BBC go about things in the UK, different to the way that your broadcasters in Asia go about things. And so, if we are looking after an international customer base, then obviously cultural differences play a part in the way that we deal with those customers. And so it's incredibly important that we have people working within our company that understand those sensitivities and differences, because otherwise, how are we going to be best placed to meet the needs of those customers and keep them happy? And you know, people watching this, I'm sure will recognize the differences even between, you know, continental North America and the UK and Europe. You know, I mean, the UK and the US and Canada, okay, you know, we all speak English, but there are cultural differences that are very, very obvious and very abundant there too. So, so I think it's important. It's a global customer base that we're dealing with. You know, all 4 points of the atlas of the map. So we have to bring different perspectives together in our professional lives, I think, to get the best possible outcomes.
So what aspects of creativity find their way into product management and corporate decision making?
I certainly think it has an implication for how you structure your business. You know, I think when I started off my career, and I started off in with manufacturing companies that were making products for audio and visual AV applications, so pro products for, you know, recording studios, mastering suites, all that sort of stuff. And because it was hardware based, like I said earlier, there was a lot of time and emphasis went into the design, so that hopefully when the manufacturing took place, everything was the way that it should be. And then products went out into the market and customers were hopefully very happy with them. I think the way companies are structured now is different. I think R&D looks different to the way that it did in those kinds of companies. I think these structures are probably flatter but broader, if that makes sense. So you'll have more people working on smaller parts of problems to then come together and pull these things together for software releases. So I think structure is different. I think management attitude that you mentioned there, I think that has to be different as well, because if you are going to encourage an environment where people or you're going to create an environment, where people are encouraged to kind of take risks with things. It means that your managerial approach has to be different. You probably have to give people a little bit more rope. You have to be a little bit more tolerant of these things in terms of the environment. It's not. It's more fluid, I think, now. You know, the rules are a bit less hard and fast, which is a different kind of challenge. It's still challenging, but it's a different kind of challenge, I think, for managers and C-level execs.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Okay, so look at the flip side of our discussion on what we can do to foster creativity and innovation. What are the kinds of things, the bad things, that shuts down creativity and innovation?
On the flip side, I think if you don't encourage creativity, if you don't create an environment where innovation is fostered, I think people will just move. You know, they will not feel that they're capable of expressing themselves. They will feel that they are perhaps implementing other people's decisions, good or bad, rather than being able to sort of make their own decisions and really contribute to the to the company. So I think you can stagnate. I can't think of any industry at the moment where innovation isn't important. And again, to come back to my recipe analogy, you know, that constant requirement for tinkering and sort of, you know, messing around a little bit with the ingredients and their proportions, it means that you have to have smart people around the table who are prepared to try and innovate and tackle problems from a different direction, because there is no standing still. If you're not making progress, if you're not moving forward, then you're going backwards, because the competition are all doing exactly the same thing as you. Your competition are always pushing forward.
You used a quotation that I use. Can you recall who said it?
Gorbachev.
Was it?
Mikhail Gorbachev. Allegedly.
But it's absolutely true. You know, because of the dynamic nature of most industries now, almost every industry, and because of the fact that the landscape is always shifting beneath your feet, the minute that you stop and pause for breath, or the minute that you think that you've nailed the secret recipe, somebody comes motoring past you at 100 miles an hour, and you've got to start running to catch up again. That's just the way it is. It's a constant race, and you're constantly, or you should, I think, constantly be analyzing the parameters and the metrics to figure out what's working and what isn't. And if you're not prepared to do that, I think you won't keep good people, unfortunately. They will just move on.
Moving on, it is often said that true creativity and innovation can lead to market disruption. What are your thoughts on this?
I think the one thing that I would say, and again, I've thought about this a bit since you first approached me on this, I think there are a whole list of things that have come along in history that have been innovative and have been disruptive.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about things like Uber, for example, things like Amazon. The things, and I know we've both gone through the pragmatic courses, and the thing that they stress is that outside-in approach. And I've thought about that a lot, especially moving to my new job. I think so many of the best innovations that come along because people are really prepared to bootstrap themselves into the role of the customer. They're really prepared to think about customers' experiences of a product or a service, and they are really driven by a desire to do a better job, to build a better mousetrap. You can say what you like about Uber, and you can say what you like about the contracts that the drivers have and the working conditions and whether they are fair or not. But from a customer's perspective, compared to, in London, we have the famous black cabs who had a monopoly on a taxi service in London for a long, long time. Many of them didn't routinely take credit cards. Sometimes it was hard to get a cab at certain times of night or certain parts of town. And Uber just came along and just quite literally drove a truck through the middle of that and said, we're going to do something that really puts the customer's convenience and best interests at heart. And I think if you can really spend time understanding your customer, understanding what motivates them, what it is that they want, then you stand a much better chance of creating something that will succeed.
So we're coming to the end of this short video, and as I suspected, it's been a great conversation. But one parting question. Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of creativity and innovation, and anything we've not discussed that you think we should be aware of?
I went on a visit once to the main Google campus in California, and it was the most bizarre experience for me because there were all these people doing stuff. It felt very sort of, I couldn't really see where the hierarchy was. It felt very sort of relaxed is maybe the wrong word, but it sort of felt a bit like organized chaos, really. And people were kind of off on their own little business units, just working on stuff. And I thought, how do people, what are the metrics here? How are people measured? And what are the, what kind of deadlines are they working to? Because it just looked like everyone was super chilled and just working on their own little things. But of course, behind all that is a very, very strong corporate plan, a very clear sense of direction that is very clearly communicated and articulated to people. So I think it's great for people to have freedom and scope to be creative and innovative. But I think you do have to set clear boundaries. You do have to give people a very, very strong sense of what your corporate direction is, what your corporate strategy is.
You hit the nail on the head, and one comment that particularly resonated with me was your Google experience. From the outside, it looks like chaos, but in reality, it's planned, permitted chaos. There are boundaries, but within these boundaries, people are allowed to experiment and without fear of failure.
That's true, and I think with Google, I mean, just quickly to expand on that. I mean, when I went there, I was there for a couple of days, and it almost felt like a university research lab. It felt like people were there sort of testing things and trying things out just to see what would work. It didn't feel like a commercial organization to me when I was there, but they go to great lengths to make sure that they get the right people, and they work them hard. I mean, they are well paid for their efforts, but they are really, they're hardworking people, and they buy into that company culture 100%.
Yeah.
Now, again, whether you think that's right or wrong, some people might think that's great. Some people might think it has a little bit of a sinister element to it. I don't know.
Well,
But
yeah.
it is very much about that strength of culture and getting the right people who will buy into it 100%.
You mentioned it looks like a university campus where folk are trying many, many different things. This is a key creativity trait, and we call it play. The most creative humans are children because they are allowed to play, hopefully in a safe area created by their parents, and without fear of failure or judgment. Unfortunately, as adults, we've lost this ability to play. There's just too much at stake. So it's great to see companies like Google are trying to introduce play into the workplace. Well, Stuart, as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to go for a courier game, perhaps this time in Cambridge. So until then, I thank you.
No, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope
Okay.
you'll be very useful.